Thank you for joining us again. This is a continuation of the previous episode. As always, here's your host, Nikesh Gosalia.
I know that there is the research excellence framework in the UK and perhaps many other countries, trying to adapt to it or maybe customize it to their requirements as well. Just like anything else, there are maybe two sides to the story. There has been some criticism around the research frameworks, but at the same time, UK in many ways has led just coming up with a framework and perhaps, improving it every 6 years. Just in terms of your opinion on the research excellence framework, does it work? Do you think universities need it? And if there are changes to be made, what would be your recommendations, Phil?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's interesting, actually, because I think a lot of academics love to hate the REF, as we call it, the Research Excellence Framework. It used to be the RAE in the previous incarnation. A lot of academics hate it. It's high stakes. It's grueling. It's a huge bureaucracy. It obviously puts a lot of pressure on individuals around their performance. So it is a huge and unpopular exercise and expensive as well to administer. But I have to confess, actually, I still believe it's a really, really important principle. On two levels. One, on the most rudimentary level, I think evaluating quality of research nationally is important. I think the transparency is always good for taxpayer funding. We do want to understand taxpayer funding that is incredibly hard to come by in difficult times is being spent well, and that universities are accountable for that and they are assessed for that. And there's no question that I think since assessment was introduced, the quality of British or UK research in general has been improving. I think that competitive element drives performance, focuses attention, focuses mind. So I think there is a fundamental point that it's, measurement is important. But actually what it does as well at the REF in Britain is that it is a really important source of funding. So we have the dual support funding system, which I think is brilliant. And perhaps one of the reasons why the UK does actually punch above its weight. The UK is relatively underfunded in terms of research. We're way behind the OECD average in terms of the proportion of our GDP that we spend on research. We've been talking about trying to hit the 2.3% for a long, long time. We're way short. We're a long way off. We are worse funded in research than a lot of other nations, and yet we still perform incredibly well. And I think part of that is the evaluation system, but also this dual support element. So we have the research councils who will give out grants for specific projects, a competitive basis. You bid, you succeed or fail, you get grants for a specific project. And that's the lifeblood of many academics' day jobs. There's a controversy there about how high the failure rates are, how much time is wasted on failed grants. But ultimately, that grant system is, directed. We've got funding for these key areas, and you go and bid for that funding. But the Research Excellence Framework funding is what we call QR, just quality research. And based on that exercise, universities just get this massive lump sum. Well, it's not always massive, but they get a lump sum that says we've evaluated your research on the basis of your excellence or your strengths. We're going to give you X amount of money, and it's yours, and you can do what you want with it. And for me, that's a really important principle because it effectively protects academic freedom. It protects that really rare opportunity for universities to have blue skies thinking, to have curiosity-led research, and it almost protects the sort of framework of academics and scholars pursuing curiosity, pursuing a blue skies approach. And they're often the ways that create the biggest breakthroughs. The most important research might come from areas where you don't know what the outcome will be, you don't know where it's going. So it balances the applied research saying we have a problem, we need to solve it, or we have a widget we want to invent. And the other area, blue skies, we want to understand the world better. And we don't know if it'll be worth any money. We don't know whether we'll make a breakthrough, but we need to understand this. And by understanding it, you sometimes get the greatest breakthroughs. Over the course of history, so many of the biggest breakthroughs ever have been through research projects that didn't have a specific outcome in mind. They were byproducts. So I think the dual support system that the Research Excellence Framework funds is brilliant and really, really important, and has been very successful for the UK. I think within that, of course, you have a lot of criticism of specifics. What are the metrics? What are the levers? And obviously, the minute money's attached, and actually in the UK, it's not just the money that's attached to the Research Excellence Framework, it's the prestige that's attached. It does inform how universities are perceived, how their league tables in the domestic scene are perceived. So reputation-wise and funding-wise, it's very, very important. So, of course, what you do find there is gaming. You do find universities doing whatever they can to game it, whether that's the controversial bit, in the past, excluding scholars, saying they're not research active, not submitting them, so their careers are sort of damaged and they feel, it's a slightly humiliating thing to say you're not going to be submitted, you're not research active. There's all sorts of gaming around, do you go for quality or quantity? So do you submit only a very small number of your very best researchers to get a good score, but obviously you don't get much funding? There was a terrible transfer market where it's almost like the Premier League football, where the top researchers would be paid huge sums of money to defect and take their teams to another university, and they take their research with them. So it's not like a footballer who scores goals for Barcelona and then gets headhunted by Manchester City. They don't bring their goals with them. They have to start again. But so there's a lot of gaming and a lot of manipulation because the stakes are so high. But actually, each time round, they try and refine it. They try and improve it. They try and reduce gaming and tighten it up. And ultimately, the heart of it is a massive peer review exercise, human judgment, peer-to-peer expert judgment that sits on top of it all. So despite the fact it's hated and it's problematic, I have to confess, and I'm not making myself popular here, I actually think it is a positive force for UK higher education. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of criticisms of that, but fundamentally it does the right thing for the right reasons.
I'm hoping that a lot of listeners are football fans like me. And I think that analogy was really well mentioned. And, I think, you hit home the point. Looking forward, Phil, I don't know if I can say that we are probably out of a pandemic or just, on our way. And during the last 2.5, 3 years, all of us and all of the industries had to adapt and make a lot of changes. Just looking forward, maybe due to the pandemic or even otherwise, how do you see the next 5, 10, perhaps 15 years as far as higher education is concerned?
I think there's no question that the pandemic massively accelerated our understanding of the role of digital remote learning in higher ed. Obviously we were all forced overnight to go to remote learning. I think that what's probably been misunderstood is that a lot of cases people thought, it just means lectures have moved on to Zoom and they're boring and they're passive and it's all a bit inferior. But I think what's been clear to me is that there are cases of great innovation and great excellence and good practice in teaching in a remote environment with digital support. So there's no question there's been a very rapid acceleration of our understanding of that world, our ability to harness that world in a positive way. So I think there's probably a sense that there's no fully going back to the old ways. Of course, students want to be back on campus. Of course, the campus environment is still really important. Of course, in-person lectures have huge value. In-person interactions have huge value. But I do think we'll see a more hybrid world, where we try and harness the best of both. There's a lot of merit in being back on campus. There's a lot of merit in meeting face-to-face. There's huge advantages to that. But actually, there's some amazing opportunities in digital that we should harness, from, being more accessible to students, to giving students their access to information on demand, to capturing more of student behavior in terms of using sort of digital and data to understand and personalize their learning, to bringing in guest speakers from across the world, using some of these platforms to mix up the environment, the flipped classroom. You can bring in a guest speaker on an on-demand lecture from Harvard and have the students view that online on demand, but then you can then turn it into a rich seminar where on the ground in person you really explore those ideas and challenge those ideas. So I do think there's a wonderful hybrid world out there that we have accelerated. And a lot of universities have talked about, even though we're starting to really feel confident we're coming out of the pandemic, universities are often saying we won't go fully back. We will always now retain an element of hybrid. So I think that's here to stay. I think that raises questions about the sort of physical environment. I do think the idea that the campus is dead or in-person education is dead is nonsense. I think that's a huge exaggeration. But I do think universities will use campuses differently. Do they need a lecture theatre for 400, 500 students when they're all sitting in silence listening to a great, wise scholar? Is that an appropriate way of learning anymore? You can get that online. Should you use the spaces for more interactive learning, for more collaborative learning, for smaller groups, seminars, problem solving? So maybe the traditional lecture is starting to phase out and to lose its relevance, even though it's been in place for centuries and it's been effective. I think people are recognizing it's not the best way to impart knowledge. So that's an issue. I think assessments, the forced move away from everyone sitting in an exam room in silence for 3 hours has probably asked people to say, hang on a minute, is that really how we should assess people's ability to thrive in the workplace or their ability to thrive in society? Do we ever really have those sorts of assessments? Should we not rethink assessment and be more thoughtful about how we challenge and test students' knowledge? How do they prove themselves in the real world? It's usually through teamwork, through problem solving, etc. So I think there's those sorts of changes will be permanent and accelerated, and I think it's good. I think it'll enhance the overall student experience. I mean, in terms of the future, one of the major pushes that we see everywhere is lifelong learning and micro-credentials. I went to a tech summit in Saudi Arabia not long ago, and a very senior chief executive of a learning platform said, oh, well, what Spotify has done for music, what Netflix has done for entertainment, what Airbnb has done for the hotel industry, we're going to do for higher ed. And the hype was crazy that, who needs a university when you've got an education platform where you can just take bite-sized courses, MOOC courses, micro-credentials, build your own credentials. And I think that hype is misplaced. I think universities have been around for centuries for a very good reason. There's very important reasons why a 3 or 4 year degree, an immersive deep learning degree is right and appropriate. I think those skills and that type of learning will be essential for our future knowledge economy, the digital economy. We need problem solvers, deep thinkers, critical thinkers, communicators, contemplative people to get us through the future of uncertainty around AI, etc. But I think lifelong learning will be massive. So the set of skills you learn at university should be lifelong skills, qualities and attributes rather than actually technical knowledge, because your technical knowledge will need refreshing a lot. So I think a lot of flexible, a lot of on-demand, a lot of micro-credentials, a lot of credit accumulation transfer will be a normal part of education now. That hopefully your degree will teach you how to learn how to think, but you'll perhaps have to keep going back to either universities for small courses or other providers in the private sector for bite-sized chunks, micro courses, flexible learning throughout your life. But I don't believe that the traditional university model is going to be fundamentally disrupted. I just think we're going to have a more blended economy, a more mixture, more entrepreneurial universities. But for me, the core 3 or 4 year immersive full-time degree will still remain incredibly popular and incredibly important. We just need to be flexible and creative around the edges of that in terms of widening access and letting people access smaller chunks of learning throughout their lives.
I fully agree with you. I think, yes, there'll probably be, some enhancements. There'll be changes to make the whole experience perhaps just more engaging, seamless. But the fundamentals probably won't change. Personally, even, I've decided to kind of go back to studying, to upskilling myself as part of lifelong learning. So I agree with you, Phil. I know you briefly touched upon AI. To kind of elaborate a little further while talking about the future of higher education, do you think technology, specifically, things like AI, do they have a place in higher education, or do you think it's highly controversial? There are some ethical issues.
I think it really depends on the application. I think on one level, inescapable. I think AI is just going to become more and more of a part of our world. It's going to be developing so dramatically. It'll be much more of an important part of our economy, much more of an important part of our daily lives, and also the workplace. Certain roles and skills could easily be replaced by more autonomous thinking machines, etc. So there is a sense it's inescapable. On one level, actually, I think that it almost makes the demand for university degrees in the arts and humanities more important, because actually we need ethicists, we need lawyers, we need philosophers even to cope with what it really means if we do get to a position, and I'm sure we will, where we can't differentiate between a thinking machine and a human being. And actually the dystopian ideas that machines could potentially subjugate humans, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that could be a reality. It's a science fiction nightmare that may well happen unless we actually create the right framework, the right structures to govern that properly. And I do think all the softer elements of university degrees around arts and humanities will play a massive role in that, genuinely understanding what humanity is in a world where AI could have really, really progressed massively. So I'm a massive fan of lawyers, ethicists, philosophers, historians to be really part of the conversations about how AI affects society. But that's really looking at AI as society. In terms of AI in higher ed, I think, if it's governed properly and done well, I think it has extraordinarily potentially positive applications in, identifying talent, helping with admission processes, marking and providing feedback to student work. I mean, that could all be very positive if if the correct ethical frameworks are put in place. And obviously we do know, even from these early ideas around, early AI, where human biases get implanted, racial prejudice almost comes through. You've got all sorts of things where the design of these things, human weaknesses and human prejudices creep through. I always remember hearing about a conference we did, and all the black delegates were all held up with the facial recognition systems because they didn't actually properly recognize and understand their skin color. Just really basic errors like that. You hear about all these bots that become prejudiced and unpleasant because they're learning from the data on social media, for example, and have all the human weaknesses there. So if we can have a governance system that prevents all those awful potential negative side effects, I think we should be thinking of harnessing AI in positive ways. Certainly around research. You think about basic elements of research where you have to maybe manually scan, in medicine, for example, are you manually scanning for tumors or abnormalities, the ability to extremely rapidly process information. Those sorts of benefits, I think, bring huge opportunity to higher education. It's harnessed correctly. So I think it's in the same way as its role in society is going to be highly provocative, highly controversial, and will require really serious scrutiny and ethical frameworks and governance. I think it could be deployed to very positive ways in society and in higher education with the correct degree of accountability, scrutiny, and guarding against some genuinely worrying negative consequences.
Thanks, Phil. I know that you wrote an article describing a global leveling up that's currently taking place. How would you describe the leveling up that's happening in the universities?
So I think that is something that really I touched upon earlier, actually, that when you look at longer term trends in rankings, particularly the world rankings, you do see that traditionally dominant nations are starting to wane a little bit in terms of the rest of the world catching up. So, in the world rankings that are coming out in October, we will see much greater representation from Africa, for example. We will see the continuing rise of the Middle East. I mentioned Saudi Arabia and UAE earlier on. They will continue to rise and show further progress up rankings. China and other East Asian nations will cement and creep up and show more representation. So I think it's really a sense that the rankings, the traditional world rankings, have been massively skewed towards North America and Britain in particular, and Western Europe. We will see that dominance is slowly but surely starting to wane. There's much more equal excellence out there, much more equally distributed excellence. It's still numerically the US, UK dominate, but it's starting to change. And I think that hopefully has a virtuous circle element that other nations get more prominence, other nations are better at retaining talent. There's not just such a straightforward brain drain from east to west, because that's traditionally been the case, hasn't it? If you're a student in India or a student in China, if you want the best education, you've always thought, well, I'll move, with the exception of IITs in India, I'll move abroad, I'll go to Britain, I'll go to America. That's changing rapidly now. There's many more universities in Asia, Central, Southern and Eastern Asia that can say we are world class now. We can keep hold of more of our talent. So there'll be a virtuous circle. They're rising up rankings. Hopefully that means they retain more talent, they retain more equal collaborations and partnerships, and they strengthen further, and it's good news for the world. So that was my main point around leveling up. The other point that I'd make as well is that even our sense of what excellence is starting to change. I spoke earlier about the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's no question for me that actually the way the global sector has embraced impact and the SDGs as a mechanism for showing their excellence is almost starting to change how we perceive excellence. Is Harvard, let's say, Harvard is one of the very best universities in the world because it has very, very comprehensive excellence. It has world-class researchers across all departments. It produces research that's, the most prestigious. It attracts the best students. That's excellence in one measure, but what about excellence in social mobility? Harvard's not leading the world in giving opportunities to the most talented young people from deprived backgrounds. It's not doing the best job in terms of making sure the doors are open to talent from wherever the talent comes from, with whatever social backgrounds. And that is a form of excellence as far as I'm concerned. It's a role in society that's important. And so similarly, you might have, one university might get a Nobel Prize for a cancer treatment that's effective, but another university might not be doing that work, but they might be training, legions of nurses and healthcare workers that do such important work on the front line that saves many lives in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. So I just think understanding excellence in different ways and understanding the contributions universities make can be multifaceted and highly varied is starting to change the way we look at excellence. And in those impact rankings, the nice thing is that, yes, we have UK Russell Group universities in the top 10, but we also have far less wealthy, far less prestigious universities from all over the world excelling in those rankings as well. So that's part of a leveling up as well, that it's not just rich Western universities that dominate. We're discovering types of excellence in other parts of the world. So, yeah, I think it's a really positive force across higher ed that we're seeing more diversity and more global equality. And hopefully that drives further global equality as well.
I know that you read and, you write a lot yourself about a variety of topics, but of course, about higher education, about universities and future of education. I think what a lot of listeners will benefit from, Phil, is how do you keep yourself updated about the industry?
Well, one of the greatest sources, actually, I have to admit, is Times Higher Education itself. So, as I mentioned, we've been around since 1971 as a source of news. So we literally have a great army of journalists who are writing about the sector. So in the UK, we have roughly 20 journalists. We have some journalists representing us in Europe. We have a journalist representing us in Australia, looking at the Asia-Pacific region. And of course, because we also have Inside Higher Ed, the other platform that's in the Times Higher family, we have a large number of journalists in Washington, D.C. covering America. So we actually have journalists whose full-time job it is to tell the world what's happening in higher ed. So all of those individuals are experts in their field, who give news and analysis and commentary on everything that's going on in the world. And that's, for me, being immersed in that means I feel like I'm one of the best informed people out there. It's an amazing source of intelligence and information. On top of that, of course, you mentioned kindly in the introduction, and I think I mentioned it, that I run the Times Higher Education events. So the World Academic Summit is an annual gathering of very senior leaders, 400 presidents and very senior managers of the world's best universities. They gather every year. This year are in New York. Next year will be in Sydney. And they explore the biggest things that keep them awake at night, their biggest challenges, the biggest changes to the sector, all the issues. So that becomes an amazing source of information. And of course, that event is annual, but we have spin-offs. We have the Asia Summit, we have the Emerging Economies Summit, we have Leadership Summit. And then we also have events around the world for digital universities, for different job titles. So we have the Digital Universities Week series, which is all about how universities are coping with digital transformation. So not just in the teaching and learning, but through the institutional management and also research. How is digital transforming the day-to-day lives of academics and students and researchers? And then we also have something called THE Live. It's actually called THE Campus Live. THE Campus is a resources platform where academics around the world share good practice. They literally come onto the platform and provide resources to say, how do you solve this problem? How do you deal with this issue? Everything from good delivery of teaching online, right through to equality and diversity, right through to sustainable development, early career research. There's an amazing community of academics sharing good practice. So that resource exists on the website, but then we have a meeting across different parts of the world where those people come together and again share best practice. And that can actually be from everything from marketing and communications, right through to the day-to-day job of delivering great quality education to students. Good practice, trends, problems, analyses, new ideas. So yeah, it's brilliant. I'm immersed in a world that allows me to fully access some outstanding thought leadership and outstanding journalism content. Of course, on top of that, I read other publications as well and try and absorb a lot from social media. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on Twitter. I try and, pick out the gems from my community of social media friends and colleagues to see what they're reading and see what they're sharing to absorb as much information as possible. So yeah, media is the key for me, but the THE events are outstanding in terms of giving insights and understanding where the world is heading.
This is really, fantastic because I'm sure a lot of listeners will benefit from the fact that there's so much depth around the things that THE does. And so thank you for sharing that. I know you are extremely passionate about this industry, higher education in general. And, throughout the conversation today, I can see that you've highlighted that particular aspect. But any interesting moment or experience that stands out probably in your career that made you feel all of this is worth it? It's so good to be in this industry doing what I do.
I could be slightly facetious and say every day I have that feeling, but it is true. I do feel privileged every day. I guess there's a couple of moments that stand out on a personal level. I guess one was, I remember standing in the Rashtrapati Bhavan with the former president of India standing up on a stage in front of hundreds of people talking about our emerging economies rankings and hearing the late president, talking about how this data it supports the national system in India because they need those benchmarks, they need those comparisons. And that's quite humbling when you think, the data you're providing, the information that you're publishing is helping to shape policy and hopefully helping to promote quality decision-making and improving the university system. But probably the most humbling for me is when I get the real privilege of addressing the Times Higher Education Summits. So I'm not a scholar myself. I'm a journalist through trade. I've been a journalist for many years, and now obviously I'm a business executive to a large extent. But because I run the Times Higher Education Summits, I get the privilege of standing on a stage and welcoming our guests. And actually, just earlier this year, I managed to place myself on the podium where they give out the Nobel Prizes at Stockholm City Hall. So only because I'm organizing the event, I got to stand at that podium and give a speech to 300 or 400 guests in the beautiful setting of Stockholm City Hall, but also at that moment to release the impact rankings and to welcome onto the stage with my colleague Duncan, the winner, the number one ranked university leader from that ranking. And I think in that moment to understand that what Times Higher Education is able to do in sharing data, in convening the community, in bringing the sector from all over the world together. We are the facilitator of their excellence. We don't drive anything. We are there to support and facilitate and convene and inform with data and analysis and content. But just knowing that we brought together this amazing community of change makers, of leaders, of people passionate about the social impact, passionate about how to make sure universities do genuinely make the world a better place. It was unbelievably humbling. And then the personal privilege of standing in a place where so many giants of academia and research had been was particularly special. So yeah, I get a lot of those amazing moments, but that was probably a big standout for me.
And I know what you mean. If you're really passionate about what you do, then there are these kind of moments that happen pretty much on a daily basis because you're just so passionate about making a change. I know you've mentioned you are involved in so many things. There are events to run, there's traveling. I'm not sure even if you have one, but how does your day look like outside work?
Well, I have to confess, I've got an incredibly narrow life outside work because I do dedicate so much of my time to work. And obviously I don't really work in 9 to 5 because the community we serve is global. So we're often working in different time zones. And if we're not physically traveling, we are doing slightly less travel to support the environmental impact. We reduce our travel, but when we're not traveling, we might often do meetings and have conversations at all hours across different time zones. So I am ridiculously busy. I mean, to be frank, I have two priorities. One is, and this is in no particular order, one is Newcastle United. I was born and raised in the northeast of England, and I am a fan of the football club Newcastle United, the Premier League team that's always usually on the brink of relegation, but it provides a focal point, an outlet for me. I don't get to go to that many games live, but I do follow as much as I can. So that's a nice outlet. And also link back to my home community. I've lived in London for 30 years now, but I do feel strongly about my home roots and get up there as much as I can. So that's one passion. And my other passion is I do have two kids who are reaching one 18-year-old and one 16-year-old. So their own, making sure I'm as supportive as I possibly can be of their own ambitions and their own goals and dreams, and to be there for them. I don't often talk about my kids because I think they deserve that privacy, but they're my priority.
Thank you for sharing that, Phil. I highly appreciate that. And being a football fan myself, like I said, I'm looking forward to the new season and lots of changes at Newcastle United as well. So hopefully they'll have a great season.
We have another hour podcast about Newcastle, to be honest, but now is not the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The team that I follow, the least that we talk about them is better. I've been a Man United fan all throughout, and I guess I'm still living in the past. So yeah, the less we talk about it, the better. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure to talk, and thank you for your engagement and your time.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and stay tuned for our next episode.
All Things SciComm is brought to you by Science Talks, a science media channel that aims to make science accessible to all. We publish articles, videos, podcasts, and magazines. To read a transcript of this episode or watch it on YouTube, visit sciencetalks.org. Also, write to us with your views, questions, and guest recommendations at contact@sciencetalks.org. Science Talks, bringing science to you.